I'm Steve, and this is our podcast Stuff with Steve, and I'm Steve Hill here with Kaleea. Honey, how are you today, Kaleea?
I'm good. I am awake. I am vibrant. I'm ready to shoot.
Well, did you have your morning cup of coffee?
I didn't, actually.
You didn't? I should have brought you one because I have the nice Starbucks coffee, the red thing here going on at Starbucks. Mm-hmm. And what's your favorite coffee?
I don't have one. My go-to is matcha or hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate with 2 pumps of vanilla.
And whipped cream.
Whipped cream. I remember
top.
that now. Okay, fantastic. All right. And last night, what did you do last night?
Last night, I went to the gym, and then I ate Thai food.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Hey, today we're going to talk about church stuff.
Cool.
And the reason is because there was this article in Christianity Today about going to church and things like that. So, and the benefits of going to church. And I know you read that article. So can you give a summary of that article?
Yeah. So basically, the article was talking about how church attendance basically increases somebody's quality of life. So people who go to church are more likely to be happy and they're more likely to be healthy. I think one of the stats was like extended lifespan by 16 years, which is crazy.
So since I go to church a lot, maybe mine's even more?
Yeah, maybe 25, 30 maybe years, 25. Possibly. Okay, yeah. And so people who go to church are less likely to deal with things like addiction, depression, other mental illness issues, just because a lot of people get social capital from church. They get to be surrounded by community. And as our world is becoming more and more isolated, there are less places to find that.
Okay. So did the article talk about young people and church life? What were some of the takeaways with that?
So one of the takeaways that I remember was that people who are raised in kids who are raised in church are less likely to experience what psychologists call the big 3. And those big 3 are mental illness, substance abuse, and premarital sex. So people who go to church more often are less likely, kids who go to church more often are less likely to fall into those things. And even as people age, if they're not going into church anymore, the benefits of having gone to church as a child still kind of carry with them into their adult life.
Okay, that's fascinating because sometimes people, and I find this with people who would say, I used to go to church, and so I don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I see that, I just get very concerned for people because often I just see that as a symptom of a deep problem.
Yeah.
And it could be for a whole variety of reasons that people have stopped coming to church. And if I could summarize it, usually it's a sin issue.
Yeah.
To be blunt about it. So either there's like if they're married, there's an infidelity issue. There's a guilt issue of some kind. Maybe there's an alcohol or addiction problem, and there's that feeling of shame and regret.
Yeah.
So they don't go.
Yeah.
So that's over my 30 plus years being a pastor. That's one of the things I have seen is that when people suddenly quit coming to church, there's a deeper root problem in their lives as well. I also see the opposite where people who start coming to church who have never been to church before, they all of a sudden experience profound happiness and joy, like the article you just read as well.
Yeah.
So when it comes to I guess the article talked about mental health, that it's a health crisis that people aren't going to church.
Yeah.
Right.
It is.
Right now. So what are some of the things that you see?
I mean, I would think it would go back to social capital. It's just people aren't in community at all. And I mean, most people get their community from being on social media, especially in the pandemic. And church is kind of that safe haven where people are still able to have fellowship with each other. So if you take church out of the equation, I mean, that's like, I would say 75% of most people's social lives. Yeah.
So you run social media at a church.
I do. Yeah.
And so what's the irony of that?
I know, right? Churches hate social media. No, they don't.
We don't hate
no,
it.
they don't.
We don't hate it.
No, but I just mean in general, people have been can be apprehensive to social media, but I see social media as a tool for churches. It's a way to engage people who aren't necessarily engaged here in person with community, and then hopefully at some point push them towards being a part of that larger physical community.
Okay. So even though you are on social media a lot,
I am.
but I mean, it's your job.
Yeah.
Plus you do it personally.
Yeah.
Right. So what are some ways that you and Devin get connected socially? How does that play out in your
On
life?
social media?
No, I meant physically. With
Oh,
people,
physically?
Yeah, in church settings.
Yeah, I mean, just hanging out with people, honestly, going out to dinner or lunches or being a part of small groups or serving. We serve in youth ministry here at GCF. So that's how we stay connected.
Okay. And you're part of a community group right now?
Not at GCF because
Okay.
there's not one for our demographic
Okay.
yet,
Okay.
but it's coming.
All right, good. And one of the things that I think about when it comes to being at church is that in Hebrews 10, Hebrews 12, it says, Hebrews 10:24, do not forsake assembling. There's a warning about not coming to church for Christians. And I think that warning is there because of the second half of that verse, which says that when you're at church, you are able to encourage one another. And we can't get that kind of encouragement from text messaging people, I don't think. Or it's not as deep and significant as well. And so when I see people who have this thought process that I can do God stuff on my own. I don't need anybody else.
Yeah.
That seems rather arrogant to me.
Yeah, I think so.
Right? And it seems also to be self-deceiving. It's almost like saying, hey, I can live this Christian life out and I don't need anyone else. But I think what is happening too is that people fail to see that they can give service and encouragement and help to others, and they miss that component. If I don't show up, how can I help somebody else?
Yeah.
So in my small group, Mary and I have been in a small group for 30 plus years, not the same one, but all of our married lives. And one thing that we have found is that people need to connect with others for mutual encouragement.
Yeah.
We go through tough times. Who am I going to help?
Right.
So even though I may not be going through a tough time right now, if I'm there and I'm available, I can help somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in your world, have you seen where you've had the opportunity to come alongside other people and encourage them, come alongside people who are they just need a sounding board?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm able to come alongside my friends when they just need to talk. I'm able to serve students just by being here physically at a church. Yeah, you're able to host a lot more conversations that are intimate when you're a part of a church community.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was that people who attend church have less depression.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that we've seen lately is probably a spike of depression and anxiety in our culture because of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
And I get really concerned when people spiral in a little bit of depression, then they just kind of pull away,
isolate
themselves, right? So what are some ways that the church can engage people who are feeling isolated and maybe they're afraid to be around other people? They're just simply afraid.
Yeah, I mean, I think social media is a huge tool for reaching people who struggle with depression and social anxiety. I think if we can create things like this, like a podcast that engage people, even if they're not here, and even having topics about this, show people that we're thinking about them.
So when it comes to people who are isolated and secluded, in what ways does social media actually meet their need?
I would say that social media meets their need for connection, even if it's not connection as deeply as we would like. They're still getting to see things happening at your church, at GCF. They're able to laugh, I'm sure, when they see a post that makes them giggle. There's also sharing. They can share posts with people, so then they're having conversations with their friends about whatever they've seen. It can be a huge conversation starter.
Okay. Recently, we started a class for people who are having stress and anxiety at Grace Community Fellowship. And I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, that we had a really good showing, numbers-wise, for this kind of entry-level, hey, here are some tools that help you deal with stress and anxiety, because I think everyone has a level of stress and anxiety, and the church has a lot to offer when it comes to managing those emotions and managing the stress of COVID and what's going on in our world. And so do you think that's also appropriate for teenagers?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you work with youth ministry. What kind of stress and anxiety do you see with teenagers?
Social anxiety, mostly. Just having a difficult time connecting with their peers and, with leaders, obviously. And then I see just a lot of like stress. Regarding like family life, school life. Sometimes students can get kind of down in the dumps. So, yeah.
So you're not a parent of a teenager.
I'm not.
Yeah. But do you have any advice for a parent of a teenager? Because you work with kids in the youth ministry as a volunteer, when it comes to their kids and feeling anxiety.
Yeah. I would say that students have a lot more feelings and thoughts about things than they talk about. And sometimes students seem like they don't want to talk or seem like they don't have feelings. But I think if you create a space where they feel safe opening up about some of their emotions, they begin to talk like waterfalls. Just things start coming out. So for parents, be intentional about listening and wanting to listen and wanting to create that space where your kids will feel safe talking to you.
Back to what we started with that article in Christianity Today, which was about the emotional benefits of going to church, and that people who actually attend church have much higher
life expectancy.
Life expectancy. They have less depression. They're happier. That's part of the survey or the study that this group did. And with that, I often think, well, people discount the church in those ways who are not Christians.
Yeah.
And they might say that, well, church is just a crutch for you to get by with. But I would respond to that kind of criticism and just say, well, let's look at the data if you want to look at it, or look at the reality, the situation, that people who do attend church on an ongoing basis do have lower divorce rates.
Yeah.
They do have lower anxiety rates. They do have all of those things, addiction rates. It doesn't mean that people are perfect. Oh my goodness, not at all. But it does make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
And that's what we're about, right? Because Jesus can make a difference in our lives, and Jesus uses you and me and other people to help others.
Yeah.
And point them toward the transformation that we can have in Christ.
Yeah, I would argue that everybody has a crutch, and it kind of goes back to that arrogance you were talking about. If you don't think that you need to rely on someone, Christ, then that's arrogant in thinking that you're able to take care of yourself. And whether people want to admit it or not, religion is not the only thing that people use as a crutch. People use substance and addiction and sex and relationships all as crutches. So I'm proud to say that Jesus is my crutch.
Exactly. So we can make the case that attending church makes us healthier in emotional ways and all those things. Years ago, I read a study by a Harvard economist that said that churches make a huge impact into local economies. So there's a business aspect to this. Isn't that kind of weird?
Yeah.
And the thrust of that article numerous years ago was that because churches get involved in their communities, and churches do things with schools, they do things with the homeless population, churches often get people to work, or they mentor people. It has a tremendous ripple effect of positivity when it comes to economics for our community.
Awesome.
And no one's ever thought of that, right?
Yeah.
That's not, hey, if we had more churches, our economy would be better.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that the Harvard economists came up with that conclusion is because we hope, and the study pointed this out, Christians are amazing workers. Doesn't mean all of them are, but tend not to be as lazy, tend to work hard and effective. They show up all of those things you want in a good employee.
Yeah.
So we can talk about the church being beneficial to the emotional well-being of people and to the community, but it also has a positive effect financially, which is not the reason to go to church. I'm not saying that, but it's like, oh, well, that's interesting kind of thing to say.
Yeah.
And when it comes to church, we sometimes forget of all the benefits of all that.
Yeah.
I like the way that you said social capital.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what that term means to you.
So social capital is just your ability to connect. Mm-hmm. So if you remove church from the equation, you're taking a really big piece of the formula away where you could be connecting to people. You can find social capital at school, at work, at church, but especially with COVID, those things were limited. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's social capital. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Hey, my hope for everybody who's listening is that you would find a way to connect, and that you would not discount the value of your presence in church for your personal well-being, but also that you have the opportunity to give to others.
Right.
And so it's a two-pronged thing. I give and I receive. And so when we fail to show up and be present, we often are discounting, or it's just hurting ourselves and hurting others.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, great. Hey, thanks for talking with me today.
No problem.
About church and our health and the importance of attending church and being involved in the relationships and relational capital.
Yeah.
And this is Steve. Grace and peace be with you. And I hope that God is working in your life.